Isolation in trading is not merely the absence of colleagues. It is a full operating environment in which you are the only source of meaning, method, and metrics. Without design, isolation amplifies noise, magnifies self-doubt, and turns minor variance into identity-level threats. With design, isolation becomes an advantage. It removes performative pressure, eliminates committee drift, and allows a small edge to repeat because there is no audience to please and no narrative to maintain. The task is to turn solitude into structure so the mind stops negotiating with urges and starts executing a plan. Begin by redefining what it means to stay sane. Sanity in this context is not a mood. It is stability of behavior under uncertainty. Stability comes from three alignments. Meaning is aligned to process rather than to money, so single trades cannot hijack identity. Method is aligned to your cognitive bandwidth, so rules are simple enough to execute under load. Metrics are aligned to professionalism, so you can verify whether the operator is getting stronger regardless of today's result. When these alignments hold, isolation is quiet rather than loud. The screen becomes a set of conditions, not a referendum on self-worth. You design the day as a sequence that protects attention and boundaries before markets supply their own. Start with a pre-session transition that moves you from civilian to operator. This is not entertainment. It is conditioning. You breathe to a steady cadence until pace slows. You speak one sentence that defines a good day as fidelity to rules, risk, containment, and schedule integrity. And you read the few lines that state your authorized instruments, time references, and risk unit. You set start and end time and accept them as limits. You declare flat as the default state. You load selection criteria, entry timing, exit logic, and abort conditions into working memory by reading them out loud. You open only the charts and tools your method requires. Everything else stays closed. You do this the same way every day because routine is the only antidote to the variability that isolation invites. You then install attention hygiene. In isolation, the brain searches for social cues to calibrate risk and reward. If it cannot find them, it will try to invent them from noise. You prevent this by removing optional inputs and by giving attention a fixed path to walk. The reference time frame is viewed first, the execution view second, and any lower resolution chart only when the plan requires timing. You ban live commentary streams, prediction threads, and opinion feeds during the session because they inject foreign incentives into your decision engine. You keep the layout stable so signals pop from familiarity rather than from novelty. You use neutral colors and consistent annotations so eye movement is automatic. Your workspace looks boring on purpose because boring keeps arousal low, and arousal management is the core challenge of solo trading. You establish language as a tool rather than as a diary. In isolation, there is no colleague to mirror your words back to you. So, words must police themselves. You replace hope and fear statements with operational statements. The edge is present and the risk is defined. The premise is intact or the premise is broken. The exit rule is pending or has fired. You speak these lines quietly at decision points. Speech slows thought and forces precision. Precision prevents hijacking. You do not say "I need this" or "I deserve this" because those phrases smuggle entitlement and urgency into the cockpit. You say, "I will execute the next instruction in the plan." This is not motivational talk. It is defensive coding that keeps the operator in charge. You treat time as a risk parameter equal to price. Isolation blurs time and invites drift. You constrain it. You set a minimum observation period before the first order, so the day does not begin with a reflex click. You insert a mandatory pause after any exit, so emotion cannot chain decisions together. You cap the number of decisions in the opening hour, so arousal cannot front-load errors. You end the session on time or at the risk cap without negotiation. These simple constraints prevent the session from expanding to fill the day and preserve cognitive resources for tomorrow. When the end boundary hits, you close platforms before you open the journal, so memory cannot be rewritten by new stimuli. You build a journal that functions as an audit surface rather than as a confessional. Isolation tempts the mind to edit the past. The journal stops that. Before the first decision, you write the session window. Instruments authorized, risk budget, and intent line. Before each order, you mark that all gates returned, yes. At entry, you record time, price, size, and confirm that protection and exits exist. While the position is live, you record only rule-relevant events. At exit, you mark exit type and delay from signal to action. After exit, you start the pause clock. At daily close, you compute adherence rate, deviation count, pause, compliance, boundary, integrity, average slippage, average delay, and the count of valid setups passed and invalid setups avoided. You classify outcomes on a simple grid. Method applied or not. Environment in plan or not. Only the quadrant of method applied and environment in plan earns the label variance. Everything else is process, and process can be improved. You choose one behavior to keep and one adjustment to test tomorrow. You write them in one sentence each. You keep a changelog so edits do not drift. This is how solo operators stay honest without a manager watching. You standardize micro resets to regulate physiology without needing a teammate to tap your shoulder. A reset has 3 steps and it runs after any loss, any deviation, or any noticeable spike in arousal. You breathe to a fixed count. You widen gaze and step back to the reference time frame. And you speak the operator line that anchors identity to execution. The entire sequence takes less than a minute. It is boring, and that is the point. Boring is repeatable. Repeatable is reliable under stress. You pre-commit to the reset, so there is no debate when you most want to debate. You protect social energy by choosing when and how to connect. Isolation does not require silence. It requires curation. You schedule asynchronous review with a trusted peer if one exists, or you simulate that function by writing a weekly letter to your future self that summarizes adherence, deviations, and the single change under test. If you participate in a community, you define rules of engagement that preserve your method. You do not post predictions. You do not consume play-by-play commentary. You contribute only after the session, with process notes or structured questions. You never move risk or change rules because of something you read. If a community elevates drama, you detach from it because attention is part of your edge and drama is a tax. You create environmental boundaries that make leaving the screen as automatic as sitting down. You choose a pre-session cue and a post-session cue that are physical and repeatable. A cup placed on a specific coaster before the session. The same cup washed and stored after. A short walk to begin and a short walk to end. A vest you wear only during trading hours and remove at the boundary. These small rituals teach the nervous system where the day starts and where it stops. They also protect relationships because you arrive present when the screen is off. Presence reduces background stress and frees capacity for discipline the next day. You design solitude to nourish rather than to deplete. That means scheduling recovery with the same seriousness as risk. Sleep is a prerequisite for risk, not a suggestion. If sleep falls below your personal threshold, you stand down or reduce activity. Hydration and simple nutrition are treated as inputs to decision quality. Movement breaks are scheduled and honored even when you feel fine, so the habit exists before stress arrives. Total screen time per day and per week is capped to prevent cognitive debt. The cap is not punishment. It is maintenance of the machine that generates your edge. You decouple improvement from mood by running weekly and monthly review windows that cannot be shortened. The week aggregates adherence, deviation types, pause, compliance, boundary integrity, delay, slippage, and selectivity. It compares realized distribution to the expected envelope for your method. If behavior is clean, an environment-matched plan and results live inside the envelope, you change nothing. If behavior drifted, you fix behavior. If behavior is clean and results fall outside the envelope, you consider method edits, but only inside a formal change window. One at a time. And forward, observe with reduced size. The month widens the lens. It asks whether rules multiplied, language softened, boundaries were negotiated, or selection loosened. It subtracts complexity, rewrites vague lines into observable conditions, and adjusts filters in plain language. This cadence protects coherence because you never edit the airplane mid-flight to relieve discomfort. You treat scaling as a professionalism reward, not as emotional celebration. Size increases occur only after a full review window shows adherence above threshold. Boundary, integrity, perfect. Deviation frequency trending down. And drawdown recovery within a defined fraction of equity. Increases are small and singular. Size reverts automatically if professionalism degrades. There is no intra-week scaling and no hot streak scaling. This policy prevents isolation from turning quiet confidence into reckless expansion. You maintain an emergency halt for rare conditions, so isolation never becomes dangerous. Triggers include platform failure, feed anomaly, unprotected exposure, severe personal distraction, or breach of the daily drawdown. The rule is flatten first, then diagnose. A short checklist decides whether the session is over or whether a reduced state is permitted. Language remains neutral, so there is no negotiation with stress. Containment is the priority because the machine must survive to run tomorrow. You structure identity so it does not require applause to persist. You stop identifying as a predictor and identify as an operator. An operator measures, executes, reviews, and rests. An operator's pride is fidelity to specification, not clever calls. This identity is compatible with solitude because it does not need external validation to function. It is also compatible with variance because it does not tether dignity to today's line on the equity curve. When identity is quiet, the screen loses its power to provoke. What remains is work. You can do the same way on green days and on red days, alone and unobserved, because the rules are the same and your role is the same. You close the loop each day with a simple sentence that points tomorrow in the right direction. You write the single behavior you will emphasize next session, and you place it where your eyes land when you sit down. You do not need a crowd to hold you accountable. You need a clear promise and a visible reminder. Then you step away and live a life that does not revolve around the screen. Solitude is no longer a void to be filled with noise. It is a container that holds your method still while the market moves. That is how you stay sane when you trade alone. Isolation rewards precision because precision leaves no space for improvisation to masquerade as insight. Begin by engineering attention hygiene at the level of inputs, sequence, and pace. Inputs must be few, relevant, and stable, so your brain does not burn energy decoding novelty. Sequence must always run from higher structure to lower detail, so context leads action. Pace must be governed by rules that slow you down when arousal rises and speed you up only when specifications are fully met. Build an information diet that you can execute every day without willpower. Keep only the reference time frame, the execution time frame, and a single lower resolution chart if your method requires timing. Remove commentary feeds that push opinions. Remove social streams that reward performance theater. And remove novelty dashboards that constantly can flash metrics with no bearing on your rules. Make your layout unchanging so your eyes and hands move by habit. Use neutral colors and consistent annotation so signals are recognized by definition rather than by excitement. Familiarity lowers cognitive load, and lower load leaves bandwidth for discipline. Codify a language protocol that eliminates phrases which invite urgency and entitlement. Replace all outcome-seeking expressions with process directives. The edge is present and the risk is defined. The premise is intact, or the premise is broken. The rule has fired, and the action is exit at first, valid moment. Speak in present tense, so your nervous system receives operational instruction rather than speculative narration. Keep each line short enough to say in one breath. This constraint forces precision and prevents the mind from attaching extra meaning. Install a rejection list for contaminated language. Words like should, need, deserve, or get back are not permitted during the session because they smuggle emotion into commands. When one appears in thought, replace it immediately with the correct operational line and return to the checklist. Over time, this reshape of words reshapes urges because attention follows language and action follows attention. Turn time into a set of rails the day cannot leave. A minimum observation period at the open prevents the first tick from defining your state. A mandatory pause after any exit breaks emotion chains. A cap on decisions in the first hour keeps arousal from front-loading errors. A fixed session end preserves energy for review and for life beyond the screen. Run these rails even when you feel calm. They are insurance policies purchased before the accident. Isolation erodes boundaries because no one is there to enforce them for you. Your answer is to build boundaries into the machine so they trigger automatically. The platform closes at end time. The order ticket locks when the risk cap is hit. A timer ends the pause. These automations convert intentions into behavior without debate. Elevate your journal into an instrument panel that verifies operation in real time and teaches future you what today actually contained. Before the session, you write the window, the instruments, the risk budget, and the operator intent line. Before each decision, you mark that every gate returned yes. At entry, you record time, price, size, and the fact that protective and exit instructions exist on platform. During the position you log only rule relevant events, so attention remains on execution. At exit, you record the type of exit and the delay from signal to action. After exit, you start the pause clock and you note compliance. At close, you compute adherence rate, deviation count, pause, compliance, boundary, integrity, average slippage, average delay, and counts of valid setups passed and invalid setups avoided. Then you classify the day on two axes that cannot lie. Method applied or not. Environment in plan or not. Variance is only granted when both are yes. Everything else maps to a process fix. You extract one behavior to keep and one adjustment to test tomorrow. You update the change log with why, hypothesis, and evaluation window. This is how an operator replaces memory with measurement and replaces opinion with iteration. Design micro resets that can run anywhere and that require no tools. A 3-step sequence is enough. Breathe to a fixed cadence, competent to lower arousal in under 60 seconds. Widen gaze to the edges of the screen and then to the room, so peripheral awareness returns and tunnel vision releases. Speak one operator line that re-anchors identity to execution and rules to authority. You run this after any loss, any deviation, any spike in tension you can feel. You also run it at random intervals to normalize it, so your brain accepts the sequence as ordinary rather than as a signal that something is wrong. The goal is not calm. The goal is controllable state that allows checklists to run. Curate social energy instead of eliminating it. Isolation does not forbid connection. It forbids noisy connection that alters incentives. Choose a structured weekly exchange that reinforces process. If a trusted peer exists, share adherence rate, deviation types, boundary integrity, and the single rule under test. If no peer exists, write a weekly letter to your future self that records the same metrics and decisions. The point is externalization, not applause. Externalization stops your story brain from editing the past. Do not engage in prediction contests. Do not seek or provide play-by-play commentary. Keep participation asynchronous and post-session so it cannot leak into live execution. If any community raises arousal, exit it. Attention is part of capital, and drama is a tax. Engineer environmental boundaries that start and end the day without thought. Pick a simple physical ritual to open the session and a sibling ritual to close it. Place a specific object on the desk to begin. Remove it and store it to end. Walk a small loop before you sit. Walk the same loop when you stand. Wear a garment that only exists during trading and remove it at the boundary. These cues teach your nervous system what role to play and when to stop playing it. They also protect relationships and preserve self-respect because you arrive present after the screen turns off. Presence lowers background stress, which frees attention for discipline tomorrow. Protect physiology as if it were part of the trading system, because it is. Sleep quality below a personal floor disables live, risk, or reduces size by rule. Hydration and simple nutrition are treated as inputs to cognition. Movement breaks occur on a schedule, whether or not you feel like it. Total daily screen time is capped. When the cap is reached, you stop. Not because you are fragile, but because fatigue is a hostile regime and your edge does not exist there. Place recovery on the calendar with the same seriousness as sessions. Quiet days are not lost days. They are how you keep the machine honest. Make improvement independent of mood through review, windows you do not shorten. The weekly window aggregates mechanics and compares realized distribution to the method's expected envelope. If behavior is clean and conditions matched, plan and results live inside the envelope. You do nothing. If behavior drifted, you correct behavior by constraint, clarity, or smaller size. If behavior is clean and results fall outside the envelope, you consider a method edit, but only one at a time and only inside a formal change window with reduced size and a defined evaluation plan. The monthly window widens the lens to structural drift. It deletes unproven rule accretions, rewrites vague lines into observable conditions, tightens or loosens filters based on evidence, and audits risk posture against realized volatility and slippage. The key is invariance. You change one thing or you change nothing, so attribution survives. Tie scaling to professionalism, not to recent profit. Size rises only when adherence exceeds threshold across a full window. Boundaries are perfect. Deviation frequency trends down, and drawdown is recovered within a defined fraction of equity. Size increases are small, singular, and scheduled. If professionalism degrades, size steps back automatically. There is no intra-week scaling and no celebration scaling. Isolation turns quiet confidence into risk quickly. Policy prevents that. Keep an emergency halt ready so rare events never become disasters. Define triggers in plain language. Platform failure. Data anomaly. Unprotected exposure. Severe personal distraction. Daily drawdown breach. The rule is flatten first, then diagnose. Run a short checklist that decides whether the session is over or whether a reduced state is permitted. Record the event in neutral words and apply the predefined consequence. Containment protects tomorrow. Drama destroys it. Anchor identity to operator, so solitude does not require applause to function. An operator measures, executes, reviews, and rests. Pride comes from fidelity to specification, not from being right. Confidence comes from repeatable procedure, not from forecasts. Dignity is preserved by boundaries, not by outcomes. When identity is built this way, the screen becomes a panel of conditions rather than a judge. Variance keeps breathing, but behavior stops oscillating with mood. That stability is the sanity you were looking for when you asked how to trade alone without losing yourself. Solitary work benefits from constraints that transform empty space into a corridor. Start by defining a daily cadence that never asks you to invent the next move. The cadence has a fixed opening ritual, a fixed analysis sweep, a fixed decision window, a fixed mid-session reset, and a fixed closure. You follow this rhythm regardless of mood, so your nervous system anticipates what comes next and stops lobbying for novelty. The analysis sweep always proceeds from structure to detail the same way. You scan the reference timeframe for regime, trend condition, volatility state, and session structure. You verify whether the environment filter is in or out of plan. Only then do you descend to the execution view to look for your setup. If the environment is out of plan, you say it and you sit. You do not search for consolation trades to fill the silence. Silence is your edge when your edge does not exist. Design defenses against the two great enemies of solitude, boredom and urgency. Boredom appears when the plan asks you to wait. Urgency appears when the plan asks you to stop. The antidote to boredom is purposeful idleness that keeps the operator available while the system stays flat. You give your hands a quiet task that does not touch the platform, like reading your one-page operator manual aloud once per hour, or practicing the breath protocol on a schedule. The antidote to urgency is a non-negotiable stop language. When a boundary hits you, speak the line "the session is over" and you stand up. there is no second voice in the room to tempt you. So you write the first voice now and you obey it later. Reduce decision fatigue by eliminating micro-choices that masquerade as control. You do not decide which instruments to watch during the session because that was chosen in the plan. You do not decide which time frames to monitor because that was defined in the method. You do not decide where to place a stop because invalidation is specified. You do not decide when to exit because exit logic is pre-written. Your only job is to confirm conditions and execute. When the mind tries to invent a choice, you notice the urge and return to the checklist. The checklist keeps your attention in the lane where your edge lives. Build a noise budget so inputs cannot expand and colonize your brain. A noise budget is a hard limit on the number of external items you may consult during the session. For most solo operators, the correct number is 0. If your plan requires a calendar check for scheduled events, you do it once during pre-market and then the feed closes. If your plan requires a volatility reading, you take it from your chart, not from a headline. If an update truly matters, your system should already know how to translate it into either trade or no trade. Anything else is entertainment, siphoning discipline. Formalize your relationship with new ideas so curiosity never collides with capital. You maintain a quarantine where fresh concepts live until they earn the right to touch risk. A new filter, entry nuance, or exit refinement is written in plain language, tagged with a hypothesis, and tested in a sandbox or with trivial size during a scheduled research window. It never enters live operation mid-session. The quarantine protects your current edge from being edited by impulse, and it protects good ideas from being judged on 3 outcomes and discarded unfairly. Isolation loves shiny objects. Quarantine keeps them from stealing your focus. Define a boredom floor and a volatility ceiling so your behavior stays bounded by reality. The boredom floor is the minimum number of flat hours you accept as normal when your edge does not appear. Naming it prevents the false belief that nothing is happening and that you must make something happen. The volatility ceiling is the market intensity beyond which your method loses reliability. Naming it prevents bravado from pulling you into conditions where fills slip, spreads widen, and rules that rely on orderly action break down. You respect both limits because both are regime filters in disguise. Make resilience measurable by tracking capacity, not just outcomes. Capacity is your ability to run the machine tomorrow as well as you ran it today. Capacity grows when you honored boundaries, executed pauses, maintained simple language, and ended on time. It shrinks when you negotiated, chased, or extended the day. At close, you rate capacity on a short scale anchored to behaviors you can count. If capacity trends down, you intervene by shrinking session length, lowering trade count, or taking a scheduled day off. Protecting capacity prevents the slow erosion that isolation can hide until it becomes obvious and expensive. Install a regret protocol to neutralize the 2 ghosts that haunt solitary traders: missed winners and taken losers. For missed winners, you say pass recorded, and you add 1 line describing which confirmation was absent. You then state that restraint preserved, edge, and you move on. For taken losers, you say invalidation printed and cost was paid at planned size. You then state which rule worked and you move on. Regret is simply unprocessed information. Process it in 1 sentence and it cannot follow you to the next decision. Leave the screen without carrying yesterday into today. Treat drawdown as an engineering problem rather than as a referendum on talent. Before it arrives, you compute the expected depth and length of drawdown for your method and your size. You write the response plan in advance. If drawdown is normal, you continue to execute while verifying adherence. If drawdown breaches the pre-computed envelope, you automatically reduce size and decisions, freeze method changes, and increase observation of mechanics until evidence shows whether the environment or execution degraded. This plan exists on paper, so you do not have to invent courage in a quiet room. You have instructions and you follow them. Adopt a minimalist toolkit that makes speed safer instead of more dangerous. One hotkey for entry with default size. One for protective order placement. One for flatten. And one to cancel all. You test them weekly in a safe environment, so muscle memory is fresh. You keep chart, annotations, simple, so nothing obscures price. You use alerts sparingly and only for conditions directly tied to your rules. If a tool adds latency or distraction, you remove it. Tools must reduce entropy. If they do not, they are tax. Anchor confidence to repeatability by practicing brief drills even on live days. You speak the operator line at the top of each hour. You rehearse the micro reset after any spike in arousal, whether or not you just lost. You scan the reference time frame before every decision, as if it were the first decision of the day. These tiny drills refresh the mapping between intention and action. They create a sense of familiarity that holds steady when variance increases. In isolation, there is no teammate to reset you. You become your own teammate by automating these cues. Separate identity from prediction by instituting a no-call policy. You never announce what will happen. You only announce what you will do under defined conditions. This policy starves the ego of attention and keeps the audience of one satisfied with execution quality rather than entertainment. It also prevents you from defending forecasts with capital, a common hazard when no one else is in the room to challenge a narrative. When you do not make calls, you cannot be trapped by them. Close each week with a letter that compresses numbers into one page of clarity. You state adherence rate, deviation, frequency, and type. Boundary, integrity. Pause, compliance. Average delay. Average slippage. Selectivity. Realized distribution versus expected envelope. And capacity trend. You write one keep and one test in simple language. You confirm that no edits will occur outside the change window. You sign your name. This letter is for you alone, but its formality matters. It is how you become your own manager without becoming your own bully. It is how solitude matures into stewardship. When you live inside these rails, isolation stops amplifying noise and starts amplifying discipline. You sit down and the room does not expand to fill your anxiety. It shrinks to the size of your plan. You watch price move and your heart rate responds, but your hands do not. You see a winner you missed, and you record pass without self-attack. You see a loser you took, and you record the cost without drama. You end the session on time. You tell the truth in the journal, and you leave. The day feels small because the boundaries are strong. Small days are the architecture of large results when a small edge is allowed to express over many trials. Solitude becomes an ally because it no longer asks you to perform. It asks you to repeat. Isolation also magnifies novelty hunger, the impulse to seek stimulation when the market offers none. Treat novelty hunger as a signal to return to specification rather than as a license to explore. When you notice the urge to add a new indicator, rotate to an unplanned instrument, or drop to an unplanned time frame. You identify the state as novelty seeking and you run the reset. After the reset, you ask one operational question. Are the conditions that Permit action present on the reference view. If the answer is no, you remain flat and you reread the selection rules once, out loud, to occupy attention with structure instead of search. If the answer is yes, you proceed through the gates in order and act once. This approach converts the craving for newness into a repetition of the rules you already trust, which is how patience survives empty hours. Another challenge of solitude is unstructured reflection, masquerading as review. Reflection without metrics invites rumination and identity judgment. Replace it with a two-layer analysis that keeps meaning clean. The first layer is mechanical. You examine adherence, deviation types, pause, compliance, boundary, integrity, delay from signal to action, slippage, adverse and favorable excursion versus plan, and selectivity. You state what is true in numbers, not in adjectives. The second layer is linguistic. You scan the day's journal for vague phrases and rewrite them into observable conditions. Felt pressure becomes breath rate increased and attention narrowed. Reset executed. Looked extended becomes price exceeded reference envelope by a defined amount for a defined duration. This two-layer practice removes fog from your memory and gives future you instructions rather than stories. Solitude can also exaggerate self-comparison through imagination. You invent the performance of others and measure yourself against it, which is a guaranteed distortion. The defense is to replace comparative goals with capability goals. A capability goal specifies a behavior you can perform on demand, independent of outcome. Examples include placing the protective order immediately at entry every single time, speaking the in-trade monitoring line every 2 minutes until exit, and ending the session at the boundary without a single extension for a full week. Capability goals are immune to variance and highly trainable. As capability accumulates, results stabilize as a byproduct without inviting the comparison trap that isolation loves to build. As a solo operator, you also need a compact method for handling unexpected spikes in volatility that distort execution quality. The procedure is simple and predetermined. When tick speed exceeds your tested range, you automatically shift to a reduced action state. Reduced action means you do not initiate new positions unless they are limit orders at predefined locations, and you do not add to positions under any circumstances. You maintain or reduce exposure. You keep hands off the stop, and you allow exits to trigger by rule. Once the spike subsides, according to your volatility measure, you return to normal operation. This prevents the common solo error of accelerating decision pace precisely when fill quality deteriorates and slippage turns small mistakes into large ones. Use minimalism to protect expectancy at the level of order types. Market orders are for exits that must happen now, such as invalidations and aborts. Limit orders are for entries and planned partials if your method includes them, placed only where your rules specify. Stop. Orders exist in the platform before you need them, not after. You do not chase. You do not drag. And you do not cancel and re-enter repeatedly to soothe discomfort. Each extra click is an opportunity to convert a defined risk into an undefined risk. Minimal order doctrine keeps friction low and frees cognition for monitoring premises instead of micromanaging fills. Build competence with a friction ledger that tracks small operational errors invisible to the equity curve, but corrosive to professionalism. You note platform hesitations, misclicks, hotkey slips, chart scale misunderstandings, and any instance where you needed more than one attempt to perform a routine action. The ledger is short and unemotional. Each line is paired with a tiny fix, such as relocating a hotkey, increasing button spacing, changing a chart scale default, or adding a single checklist prompt. Over a month, these small repairs accumulate into a cockpit that no longer steals attention when pressure rises. Guard against the solitude-specific bias of narrative time dilation, the sense that a flat hour is wasted and a fast minute is decisive. Standardize sampling so time does not distort judgment. You decide in advance how often you will scan the UT reference view, how often you will speak the monitoring line, and how often you will check the pause clock. You set quiet timers that cue these actions. This converts the elastic perception of time into a metronome. A metronome removes the urgency to act simply to prove that you are present, and replaces it with proof of presence through repeated checks. Address overconfidence without humiliation by formalizing a cooling period after clusters of wins. The policy is automatic. After a run of favorable outcomes within a short window, you reduce decision count and hold size constant for a fixed number of trades, while monitoring adherence closely. Overconfidence is not a character flaw. It is a predictable state change that follows reinforcement. Your policy absorbs it. The temporary constraint protects the edge from size creep and selection looseness that often extract the entire streak and more. When the cooling period completes with clean adherence, normal cadence resumes. Codify your relationship with boredom so it does not turn into sabotage. Boredom is evidence that the plan is filtering correctly or that the environment is outside plan. Either way, it is useful. You treat boredom as a prompt to practice micro skills that build capacity without touching risk. Speak the one-sentence definition of a good day. Reread the operator manual. Run a breath drill. Review a handful of journal lines to sharpen language. These small acts convert idle time into refinement time and prevent the brain from manufacturing urgency simply to feel engaged. Transform the workspace into a cognitive prosthetic rather than a stage. Everything in view should either lower arousal or increase clarity. Charts default to the reference view. Execution views are smaller and subordinate. Only authorized instruments are present. Colors are neutral. Annotations are simple. Numbers that invite scorekeeping are hidden during the session. The only numbers that remain are those that inform risk and rules. The goal is to prevent the eye from being dragged into irrelevant stimuli. When the eye is calm, the mind is calmer, and calm minds follow plans. Isolated operators benefit from a tiny library of pre-written lines that mediate decisions at key friction points. Before entry, you say confirmations are complete and the risk is defined. During the trade, you say the premise is intact and I am holding by rule, or the premise is broken and I am exiting at the first valid moment. After exit, you say pause is running, and the next decision begins after reset. At the session boundary, you say the session is over and I am closing the platform now. These lines are not theatrics. They are interrupts that direct attention back to specification whenever momentum tries to carry you elsewhere. Preserve long horizon perspective with a simple monthly ritual that sits outside performance. You write a one-paragraph statement of purpose that answers why you run this system the way you do and what kind of operator you are training yourself to be. You read it once at the start of the month and once at the end. It is not a motivational poster. It is a continuity check that ensures daily variance, does not degrade the mission into a chase for excitement or status. When purpose is visible, solitude feels chosen rather than imposed, and chosen solitude is easier to sustain. Finally, Close the isolation loop with a measured invitation to community that protects your edge. The channel you build around this work exists to reinforce execution, not prediction. You share process insights, not market calls. You teach others to construct meaning, method, and metrics that survive variance. You ask them to report behaviors kept and adjustments under test, rather than screenshots of lucky entries. You remind them at the end of every session that the win is fidelity, the safety is boundary, and the edge is small but real when protected. Then you ask them to subscribe to flow state trading so this discipline has a regular place in their week, to like the work if it helped anchor their routine, and to write one line in the comments naming the single constraint they will enforce tomorrow. This is how isolation stops being lonely. It becomes a quiet craft, practiced by many, each at their own desk, each under their own rules, connected not by noise but by structure.